Hello and welcome to the meeting for Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee on 15th of September 2021. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. If a participant wishes to speak, could they please put their hand up if they can be seen on screen, or use the raise hand function. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and or to grab the attention of the chairman or Democratic Services officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman or Democratic officers know. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, and this will help the broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth, so they at least can hear and be heard. Thank you. So, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any?
Yes, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Bird. We also have apologies from Heather Smith, Anthony Raybould and Gina Doyle from the tenant representatives. Just to let you know, I think Councillor Aviat will be joining us, but she's having a few technical difficulties my colleague is helping with now, so hopefully she'll be able to join shortly.
Okay, thanks for that. Agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of July 2021. Now, I have gone through these and I am happy with them. Are we happy to accept these minutes?
Happy to accept, Chair.
Happy to accept.
Happy to accept.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 3, to receive declarations of interest. Do we have any? I can't see anybody raising their hand or on screen or in the raise hand function, so I'll take that as a no. Thank you. Agenda item 4, the enforced sale policy. I'm going to go to Mike on that. Thank you.
Chair, I think that's me.
It's actually going to be my colleague,
Sorry.
Dave Williams.
Yeah. Sorry, in the agenda conference, Mike took this, so I thought he was going to be doing it again. I'm sorry.
No problem, Chair. Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm David Williams. I'm a principal officer and I work in the regeneration team. So I'm here this evening to cover item 4, which is the enforced sale policy. So this is a referral from the cabinet meeting that was held on the 19th of July this year. So basically, in terms of the recommendations coming out of the report, there are 5. The main ones were a recommendation 2, which is an officer delegation for finalising the policy. Recommendations 3 and 4, which are basically the governance arrangements for using the policy, and recommendation 5, which is the referral to this committee, but also to corporate performance and resource. I believe this is on the agenda for next Wednesday, that particular committee. So in terms of the document that's before you this evening, there's 3 parts to it. There's the cabinet report itself, and then you've got appendix 1, which is the proposed policy, and appendix 2, which is the equality impact assessment. So I'll move on now to talk you through the report. I mean, in terms of the empty property issue, I'm sure all local members have experienced an empty property issue in their ward, and they're not particularly pleasant situations to have to deal with, particularly if you're a neighbour or living in the adjoining community. So, the paragraph 1.1 of the report is a sort of tries to kind of encapsulate that. The traditional response to empty properties, whether they be private sector dwellings or commercial buildings or land, as a last resort, is to take enforcement action. And there are numerous bits of legislation that are out there that are at our disposal. I mean, you've got the Town and Country Planning Act, you've got the Building Act, you've got the Housing Act, you've got the Prevention of Damage and Pest Act, and the list goes on. But essentially, if you have a problem and it's deemed to be enforceable, then a notice is served. And very often, if the owner doesn't comply with that notice, then you're in a works in default situation. And very often, if the owner doesn't pay the bill, then the cost of that work ends up being a charge on the property. But there's no actual outcome in terms of a change of direction in terms of the issues associated with the property. So what the enforced sale policy does is bring us to an outcome. Not only does it allow us to recover the debt, but it also brings about a change of ownership. Now I'll go into that in a bit more detail later in the presentation, if I may. But before doing that, I thought it would just be useful to draw your attention to paragraphs 1.2 to 1.6 inclusive in the Cabinet report, because that gives you a little bit of an insight, really, in terms of where this work stream has come from. Back in 2019, the National Assembly for Wales Equality, Local Government and Communities Committee undertook an inquiry into the empty properties issue. And the scope of the inquiry wasn't just problematic private sector homes, it also included problematic commercial buildings and land. So it was looking at the issue in its entirety, really. And one of the things that committee debated and took evidence from third parties, including this council, was the adequacy or not of existing legislation and enforcement powers. And they basically came to the conclusion that the powers that exist are adequate, but the actual issue is one of, well, two actually, one of capacity and the other of skills or lack of skills within the local authorities to use the powers that are at their disposal. So that was the recommendation coming out of this inquiry, and the Welsh Government took that on board. And at the end of 2019, going into 2020, they launched what was called the Anti-Property Management Support Programme. So this has been rolled out across all local authorities in Wales. And the Welsh Government has brought on board an industry expert, a gentleman called Andrew Lavender, who we've been working very closely with throughout the pandemic, really, to try and sort of build up our capacity and our skills as officers in order to make more effective use of the enforcement powers that are at our disposal. So that's some of the background, really, as to where this policy has come from. It's come directly from this work stream. So moving on into the report and the key issues for consideration. So the enforced sale policy, the bit of legislation that it is derived from is actually referred to in paragraph 4.7 of the report. It's the Law and Property Act 1925. So it's been around for a long time. But what that bit of legislation allows us to do is, as I said, in a situation where works in default have been undertaken and the cost of those works haven't been paid by the owner, we can create a charge, and under the provisions of the Act, we become a mortgagee with powers to enforce a sale. So that's the kind of legal basis for what we're doing. And as I said, it's a mechanism for firstly recovering the debt, but also for bringing about a change of ownership. And by doing that, bringing the problem to a successful outcome in terms of bringing the empty home or the empty building back into beneficial use. Some of you may remember actually when the empty home strategy was being drafted. I recall coming to this committee back in July 2019 actually on that subject, and there is reference in the empty home strategy to developing this particular policy, as I'm just mentioning to you in passing, really, for those of you who can remember. But in terms of using the policy, I must emphasise that it can only be used really as an option of last resort. It can only really be used in what are fairly extreme situations where a property has been abandoned by the owner, or we're having difficulty as officers actually tracing who the owner is. So whilst these problem properties create a lot of pain and anxiety, thankfully they are relatively few in number. And as I said, we should only be looking to use the policy as a last resort. And they're basically, before getting to a point where we use the recommended governance arrangements for this policy, I think as officers, we've got to do our due diligence and demonstrate that we're being reasonable, proportionate in what we do, and also that the proposal to enforce the sale is financially viable. In Vale, I think it's a bit of a generalisation, this, but land values are relatively high in comparison to some of the value authorities. So viability shouldn't be too much of a problem for us. But we need to do our due diligence as officers to look at the title of the property to make sure that there aren't any existing charges there. And we also obviously need to get, if we do go down the enforced sale route, we need to get the property valued as well by an RICS accredited surveyor. It isn't, there are examples, some of the value authorities, for example, where land values are very low, and therefore this policy isn't really a viable option for them. So I'll just mention that to you in passing. In paragraph 2.7, there's a list of criteria there that we would use as officers as part of the body of evidence that we present in order to get approval to use the policy. The threshold for the debt is £500. We need to make sure that the debt isn't statute barred. There's a definition of that in paragraph 4.3 of the report. We basically need to make sure that there isn't a time limit on the debt, and there is a certain period of time where the validity of the debt expires. So we need to make a check there to make sure that it's still extant. We need to make sure that the debt is more than 2 months old in order to give the owner adequate time to redeem it. If you look at Appendix 1, which is the policy, and Appendix C within the policy, there's a checklist there comprised of about a dozen stages that we go through. And what characterises a lot of those stages is the officer being very clear to the property owner of what our intentions are. So at every stage in the process, once the debt's been created, we're trying to recover that debt or give the owner the opportunity to pay the debt. And we're also explaining to the owner, if that debt isn't paid, then these are the steps that we would take in terms of the enforced sale procedure. And that's a thread that runs throughout the policy. So coming back to the criteria, number 4, we've got to be satisfied really that there's no prospect of the property coming back into use within 6 months. Number 5, we've got to demonstrate non-compliance of the legislation on the part of the owner. And number 6, again, we've got to evidence that there's been no response or acceptance of the correspondence that we've been sending to the owner. So moving on to the 5 ways of working and the well-being objectives. I won't go through all of them, but the one I wanted to highlight was prevention. Whilst clearly there's no point having a policy if you're not prepared to use it, but I think by having the policy, it could well act as a deterrent to property owners, and certainly make them think twice really about some of the situations that are allowed to develop. Moving on to the financial considerations in the Cabinet report. I've already mentioned paragraph 3, which is the Limitation Act 1980 in relation to the criteria. What I wanted to draw your attention to was paragraph 4.4. Obviously, the importance of getting a suitably qualified surveyor on board to get the property valued. And because this is a general policy, at the end of paragraph 4.4, there's reference there to the method of sale. That will be decided on a case-by-case basis as part of the governance mechanism that we would use in respect to the policy. Having looked around at some other councils' policies, the favoured method of sale tends to be auction, but that's not to say that there aren't other options that can't be considered. And then moving on to the legal considerations. Obviously, Appendix 2 is the equality impact assessment, and the main messages from that piece of work are set out for you in paragraph 4.11. I mean, the main debate that's centred around the equality impact assessment is one between the rights of the owner are set out in the Human Rights Act, as opposed to the rights of the neighbours and the surrounding community. And we've come down on the side of the latter really, and the conclusion that's come out of the assessment is that there's no indication that there is a negative protected characteristic issue associated with the implementation of this policy. Having said that, as part of our due diligence as officers in terms of presenting the request for the use of the governance mechanism, we would have to include a statement within that request to demonstrate that we've considered the equality impact of the proposed course of action. So that's a very, very quick talk through the report, and I'll finish where I started, really, just by referring you again to the recommendations. So recommendation 2 is in relation to an officer delegation to finalise the proposed policy. Recommendations 3 and 4 are the governance arrangements for using the policy, and recommendation 5 is the referral to this committee, and also corporate performance and resources. So I'll pause there. I'm sure there are lots of questions, and I look forward to answering them.
thank you for that, David. I can see Councillor Parker has his hand raised, and then I'll go to Councillor Perks, I believe. Okay, so Councillor Parker first.
Fine, thank you, Chair. David, you mentioned that the probability is that you would only get one RICS valuation. Caution tells me that 2 might be more sensible. Valuations, particularly in the Vale, my experience in Cowbridge, as you can imagine, a valuation from the 3 agents in Cowbridge can vary quite considerably. So is it more likely that you would get 2 or maybe rely on the district valuer?
I think we'd look at each case on its merits. You know, it depends very much on the location, but I think all options are on the table.
Fine, thanks very much.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Perks.
Thank you. So I welcome this proposed policy to ensure that we get buildings back into use. I think it's really important that we do that. But I just wondered, I know the policy is there at the moment, but do we have an idea of how many buildings within the Vale this policy would actually apply to at this point in time? Or is that something, once the policy comes into being, that we would be more aware of? Thank you.
Okay, so in respect of empty private sector dwellings, as part of my work area, as you know, the Empty Homes and Loans Officer works alongside me, and we do an annual survey based on council tax data. So roughly speaking, every year there are around about 800 empty private sector homes in the Vale. Now, the number of that total, which would potentially qualify for the use of this policy, is very, very small. In fact, you could probably count them on the fingers of one hand. And in terms of commercial properties, we recently did a survey of our 5 main shopping centres. The LDP team do an annual survey. And from memory, I think there were between 55 and 60 empty commercial properties. Now, I would have said as a proportion, a similar proportion would potentially be candidates for this policy. But I wouldn't want anyone to go away here thinking that, you know, we're going to be sort of pursuing a fixed number. I think it comes down very much to, you know, the severity of each case, the skills that we got within the council and the capacity to do something. So it's a bit of a balancing act, really. But I hope by answering the question, I was just trying to give you a sense of proportions.
No, that's lovely, thank you. I mean, sort of within my own ward, I know there's empty properties there. One that I've been sort of dealing with is actually in going through the legal process because the actual person has passed away. So, you know, it's not actually owned by anybody at the moment. So that wouldn't fit in this criteria as such. But I just wondered about a various number. I thought it might be quite small, really, but thank you very much.
Okay, I think the next person who would like to speak is Councillor Brooks.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dave, for that report. I mean, I welcome this report. I can remember when we had all the funding originally to bring empty homes, empty properties back into use. So really it's a testament really about the hard work I know officers put into trying to do that, and that this will only ever be used as a last resort. But I think it's a very useful tool there to have. And you know, and really it's a lot of work. It's a huge amount of a hard slog to try and even establish owners sometimes. So I can remember all that when that funding was first brought in, which did bring dividends, because when you think about the top of Holton Road, where we did all that work there and actually brought so many properties back into use, a few as a residential, but actually because of the funding that we had, actually into commercial properties as well. So that is testament actually to the work that our officers do around trying to establish owners and encourage owners and support them to actually bring properties back into use. So so I welcome this, and I'd say, you know, it will only ever be a last resort, and only when every other effort has failed on behalf of the officers. So that's all I've got to say, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Bronwyn. The next person who'd like to speak is Councillor Burnett. And Bronwyn, if you could lower your hand, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously regeneration is in my portfolio, although as property, the leader took this report to Cabinet. I think, as Councillor Brooks mentioned, this is very much a last resort, but it's part of the armoury, and it's an important part of the armoury, because these houses, not only are they properties that could be a home for someone, but they blight whole neighbourhoods. Everybody knows that, you know, the one or two or three houses that are in their neighbourhood, and there is so much work going on, and it's cross council work, it's cross team work that is going on to try and bring these properties back into use. As I say, it's a small part, because in the report that's before you, as I said, last year in 2020, 2021, over 10% of empty properties in the Vale were brought back into use. You know, that is a phenomenal outturn. And you also mentioned the work that was done in Upper Holton Road, which you know is absolutely superb, completely changed the whole feel of that area. And I have to give praise to Dave, because actually Dave was the officer that pushed that through as well. And so all these pieces of work are bringing back sort of slightly dog-eared or problematic properties back into use, back into being homes in our communities. And you know, I'm really pleased at the comments that I've heard in Scrutiny today in support of this this for sale policy. As I said, it's not good when you have to go to those lengths, but if owners won't engage with us, then there's not a lot we can do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. Councillor Neil Moore, I believe you wish to speak.
Yeah, it's just to emphasise the fact really that I brought this when we brought this together. The situation in terms of homes has seemed very successful. So this thing takes it a bit further. And Liz has said it's a tool in our armoury, because it also includes businesses and land. I think that's the important part too, is that we can build on the successes that we've had in the past. So I just urge committee to accept the recommendations as well.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. If you finish, could you lower your hand, please? Thank you. There is something I would like to say about this, and when it comes to empty homes, I would like, if possible, to see that the council try to purchase them, fix them up and add them to the council's own housing stock. We do have a shortage of certain types of homes in the Vale, and if we could possibly make every effort we can to sell these, whether we go to the auctions and bid, or it's arranged some other time, I would like to see them bought and added to council housing stocks if possible. Thank you. Unless anyone else. Oh, I think Mike wants to say something here. No, thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, it's just to follow on from that point, Chair. We are involved in conversations and discussions with Larry, the empty homes officer. And I think Dave alluded, it's sometimes more difficult in the Vale than perhaps some of our neighbouring authorities, our valleys authorities, primarily due to the land values and property values in the area. Sometimes we will negotiate or discuss with somebody with an empty home that may be willing to sell, but their aspirations in terms of their selling price in comparison to the amount of work that we would need to do to bring those properties up to the Welsh Housing Quality Standard is in some instances wouldn't be a good use of tenants' money, because effectively, as people on this committee know, it's the tenants who fund through the HRA, obviously, the improvements to our stock. But there are other properties where those discussions are ongoing, and we've had some success with some of our private landlords as well that we have relationships with. As members will know, given the scale of homelessness within the Vale and housing need within the Vale, which Chair, you've just alluded to, we obviously look at the private sector to discharge our duties into, as well as obviously our own housing. And some of our private landlords have been able to negotiate with sellers and have actually purchased some of those empty homes then to utilise as temporary accommodation for some of our families and single people. So we do look at that, and it is an option that we explore where we can. But on occasion, there is a viability issue in that sometimes do we spend on our new build programme, which is ambitious and is now moving forward at scale, or do we invest in a large amount of money in the existing stock on an individual basis? So it is a balancing act, but the council does have, I have within our housing business plan, around £1 million to enable us to look at purchases. It is an area that we will, you mentioned auctions. I quite looking forward to attending my first auction, looking to purchase some properties. But we're also working, and it's a principle the Welsh Government are looking at the moment, about us purchasing on new build estates as well. So rather than necessarily going through a development programme and in the way that we do, the potential to use our funds to actually purchase properties or additional properties to our Section 106 commitments on some private development. So it is an area that we will be exploring in the coming couple of years.
Okay, thank you for that, Mike. As I said, well, as you say, it's not going to be always possible to kind of purchase these, bring them up to standard. But as I said, it is. I was only asking that if it is possible that we do it, but it would be good to know if we can, and it would be good to expand our housing stock, as we do know that there is a shortage here. There is. I know people who have been on the waiting list for a very long time, but because they're bronze, they've not really had much luck with the with getting properties because of the shortage. So it would be good if we could increase that. So thank you very much for that, Mike. If everybody is happy with the recommendations, are we happy to accept them and move to the next item?
Happy to accept.
Happy to accept.
Okay, thank you.
To endorse, I think endorse should be probably be a good word.
Happy to endorse.
Are we happy to endorse?
Yes.
Okay then, thank you. Right, agenda item 5. Now, before we go any further, we have had one declaration of interest on this, and I believe that comes from Councillor Aviott. So, would you like to mention why, or would you like me to say?
Yeah, I'd like to declare an interest on agenda item 5, as I am a council tenant.
Okay, thank you. So yes, agenda item 5. I will I will hand you over to whoever it is doing this now, because I'm not going to make that mistake again.
Chair, I'll do a brief introduction and then hand over to Farida, who is leading on this area of work for the council. Just a little bit of background, first of all. Clearly, the tenant engagement strategy is our most important strategic piece of work. We obviously have taken some time, as members will be aware, taken some time to look to evolve a new strategy following our last strategy coming to an end last year. We've been consulting with our tenants, and as this committee will be aware, we've also been consulting via our benchmarking service, and we've provided reports in relation to the views of our tenants and where they feel that services need to improve. And you may recall that whilst the service is generally well performing, you may recall that one of the areas that we identified as an area that we needed to look at, and our tenants were directing us to, in terms of listening and acting on their views. And of course, this is picked up, as you can see, in the report that you have before you. What we've been looking to do, and through Farida's team and the Housing Management Service, the Neighbourhood Housing Service, is to understand where the key themes are, what's the direction of travel for the new strategy going forward. And as Farida will mention to you, we've identified 4 themes. So what I'm looking for Scrutiny Committee to do today really is to advise us that we're on the right track, to have a look at, we've come up with a new vision for the strategy. So again, I'd welcome your views on that vision. And finally, whilst we've not finalised our action plans, we are looking obviously at our action plans in relation to the discussions that you're having with the tenants within your wards, and clearly advocating on their behalf. What sort of things might you like to see within the action plans, which ultimately will come back before Cabinet in the not too distant future? So those are the areas that I would like committee to think about this evening. Farida will take you through a bit more detail, and then hopefully we can have a conversation and discussion around whether we're on the right track, whether we need to consider other areas. Also to be aware that there will be a second bite of the cherry, because ultimately the draft policy will go before Cabinet, as I say, and I'm sure Cabinet would like to refer then that report back to you for consideration, as we normally do. But I'll hand you over to Farida and she'll fill you in a bit more detail about the work that she's been doing over the last 8 months or so.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. As Mike has mentioned, this is an interim update report on the development of the tenant and leaseholder engagement strategy. I think some of you will note already just the title of the strategy has changed, in that this is no longer a tenant engagement strategy. This is in fact a tenant and leaseholder strategy. As part of our review, we identified a gap in that, you know, we have leaseholders who are service users and they are not part of our tenant engagement strategy as such. So therefore, the title reflects that this new draft strategy will encompass tenants and leaseholders. So just start off with that. So the aim of the report really is to give you an update on where we are in terms of the development of the strategy. And first off to say, we have a strategy in draft. It's not fully completed yet, but we have some actions outlined and we have a vision and some key themes based on the review that we have undertaken. We're currently undertaking a equality impact assessment, and as part of that work, the draft strategy will then need to go to the GLAM network and also the recently launched BME network for comment. The draft version also on Friday will be going to the tenant working group meeting. Now, tenants have been a central part in the development of this new tenant and leaseholder participation strategy, and I've been a regular attendee at the tenant working group, and the tenant working group will have first sight of the draft working document, in order that we can get their input right from the beginning and also on the first draft. Furthermore, the initial draft has also gone to our internal tenant and leaseholder working group. This is a new working group that we have launched to develop this new strategy. We recognise that within housing, we need to take a cross-departmental approach in developing our new strategy. So the draft strategy that we are proposing and we're working on has already been to the internal tenant and leaseholder working group. Procedurally, as Mike's mentioned, it's my understanding that we'll discuss it initially here today, and then the draft will go to Cabinet for a working draft approval, and hopefully back to this committee for full scrutiny. And at that point, it will also go for public consultation on our website. I don't know whether members have recently taken a look at the Vale Homes web pages. We're making a concerted effort to put information on the website in relation to tenant participation activity. So in terms of today, I'm looking to introduce the draft vision, the draft aims and objectives, and also in terms of a recommendation, as Mike has mentioned, to note the aims and objectives and to provide feedback. And really the reasons for this is to ensure that we have the current review that we've gone through is comprehensive, and also that the engagement work that we take forward as part of the new strategy allows tenants and leaseholders to have their say, and also for them to shape and influence the services going forward. So in terms of a background, the previous tenants the previous tenant engagement strategy went to Cabinet for approval in 2018, and this committee has been receiving subsequent reports in relation to updates on the action plan associated with that strategy. The initial strategy of 2018 had 4 themes within it. This strategy also, as Mike's mentioned, has 4 themes as well. The initial strategy of 2008 included themes of integrating the tenant's voice, creating an inclusive approach to engagement, building capacity of residents so they can actually have their say and they have the confidence to have their say, but also listening and learning. The new themes, and I'll talk to you about them in a little bit more detail later on, but I'll just introduce them here. The new themes are to involve tenants, to ensure that they're able to influence, to invest in tenant and leaseholder participation, and to ensure that we can demonstrate that tenants have been able to, that tenants have been listened to and their opinions have been valued. There are 3 main themes. The 3 main ones are involve, influence and invest, and to be listened to and valued is an overarching theme that we are suggesting for the strategy. So in terms of the work that we've been doing over the last 8 months, we've had a comprehensive review of our tenant and leaseholder engagement work. And in particular, we've had regard to good practice in the housing sector, and particularly taken into account the work of the Wales Regulatory Board and their review of tenant participation and their recommendations that they have made in terms of how to become a listening organisation. In addition to that, we have really focused internally on staff members as well, in terms of listening to staff members and taking their views on board in terms of how they feel our last strategy went, and have undertaken a comprehensive SWOT analysis, understanding strengths from their perspective, weaknesses from their perspective, opportunities and also threats. And we've taken a bit of time in turning them opportunities into actions and considering them weaknesses and thinking about, well, what is it that we can do with them weaknesses? So that's the consultation that we've done with staff members. But in addition to staff, because we felt quite strongly about the importance of having staff members playing a key part in tenant participation and engagement, we also did some comprehensive engagement work and took feedback off tenants. And in relation to tenants engagement, the feedback that we looked at first and foremost was the SAR Star Satisfaction Survey, which is a biannual survey that is sent out to all tenants and feedback is sought on a range of matters. In addition to this, we also undertook a Pacific survey with engaged tenants. These are the tenants that are already engaged within our engagement structures. And we sought to ascertain whether they actually feel that they're able to influence the services by their feedback that they provide to us. We also then spoke to the same cohort of engaged tenants to understand whether digital participation was an option for them, given what we've learned with the pandemic and the fact that we haven't been able to meet physically. Are our tenants geared up to engage with us digitally, and can we offer that support, and what does that look like? So we did a comprehensive exercise in terms of understanding digital engagement capacity of our current engaged residents. And also, one of the other things that we did in terms of tenant engagement is we've launched our tenant profiling exercise. And what that exercise is we aim to contact all of our households to update data in relation to their contact preferences, whether they are aware of the various ways in which the residents can get involved in our involvement structures. And just picking up on the recent feedback that I've had, based on 100 tenants surveyed, only 32% of the tenants that responded stated that they knew that they could be involved in tenant participation structures and have an influence. So that was very interesting learning for us. We also then looked at the lessons that were emerging from the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and also that key point about ensuring that tenants are heard, and that's a key theme that is coming through, and we think that our proposed objectives pick up on the point of tenants feeling heard. So taking all that on board, we have considered what our vision would be going forward for tenant engagement and leaseholder engagement. And for us, it's twofold. It's not just about the tenants, it's also about creating the right culture for our staff members to promote that engagement. So our vision is to create a culture where we develop and maximise opportunities for tenants and leaseholders to contribute towards creating tenant and leaseholder centred services. So it's about putting tenants and leaseholders at the heart of what we do, but also taking our staff members along with us. And in terms of delivering that vision, as I've said, that there are three themes and one overarching theme, and I'll talk about the themes in detail here. So the first theme I mentioned, which was involve, and involve is all about to involve our tenants and leaseholders to work to co-create and develop tenant and leaseholder centred services. So services that are meaningful to our tenants and offer value for money. And an example of an action that we might take forward in relation to that is that from a staff point of view, what we will be looking to do is, and we have done, is we've launched an internal cross-departmental group and are sharing ownership of tenant participation and involvement. So it doesn't just rest with one officer within the local authority or just the housing management team. It's a cross-departmental working group that covers all areas of housing within the housing section. An action that we're taking forward in relation to involvement from a tenant perspective is that we will be launching a menu of opportunities for tenants to get involved, both formal and informal. I've also mentioned that, you know, we're updating our website, and that will become a comprehensive place for tenants to log on and have a look at what's happening when. Just to say, in terms of the strategy action plan that we have in draft, how we've developed it is that we've stated that we will have some internal staff cultural actions that we will take forward, and we'll have some actions that we take forward specifically related to tenants. So that gives staff members real clarity on what their role is and what their expectations are. So in terms of the second theme, invest, and that is to invest in financial resources and enable the development of tenant and leaseholder driven services. And an example of what internal cultural actions we might take forward under that team is that we will provide our staff members comprehensive training on what tenant participation and leaseholder participation looks like as part of the new strategy, and what that means for staff members, and how they need to take forward or be part of tenant participation as per their everyday roles. In terms of what an action might look like for residents, we will provide our working group with a fully costed budget. So that's the tenant working group and also the staff working group, of a fully costed budget of what monies we will be providing in terms of taking tenant participation forward. And also, I don't. Some of the councillors that have been around for longer than myself and would remember that years ago we launched something called the Tenant Compact, and the Tenant Compact was a very comprehensive document around the council's commitment to tenant involvement and what support they could have in relation to tenants and residents group. So we'll be looking to resurrect the Tenant Compact and relaunch that. In terms of the third theme, to support tenants and leaseholders to help influence and shape current services from a service user's perspective and help tenants realise their potential. What we be looking to do from a staff perspective and internal cultural action is we will be looking to support the development of the launch of a tenant-led scrutiny model, and as part of that we will be launching something called service quality assessors and mystery shoppers. So we'll be helping facilitate the option for tenants and residents to come in and mystery shop some of our services where we've had the highest number of complaints, or services that tenants feel that we ought to scrutinise a bit further. In terms of an external action we might do in relation to showcasing how tenants have been able to influence tenant participation work, we'll produce an annual publication which we would call You Said We Did, detailing what tenants and residents and leaseholders have expressed to us and what we have done in return. And that links closely to the overarching theme about tenants being listened to and valued. Our internal working group will look to monitor the draft strategy, and we will benchmark against similar organisations and ensure that we operate a continuous improvement culture. And from a tenant's point of view, I've already mentioned the publication that we will do, and also we'll continue to undertake our biannual staff satisfaction survey, listening to the tenant's voice. So they were the themes. Underpinning all of this are a couple of drivers that I mentioned earlier from the staff satisfaction survey. Biannually, we undertake the staff satisfaction survey. There's 3 key questions in there from my perspective and the internal staff working group's perspectives that we felt were really key and at the heart of tenant involvement and engagement. And that was to demonstrate that the organisation listens and acts on our view, on the tenants' views, and that the tenants are kept informed, and also to witness an increase in overall satisfaction. The first 2 of these in the last satisfaction survey, we received a decrease. And the aim is, as we deliver the new tenant participation strategy, we aim to achieve an increase in them 3 drivers stroke indicators. I think that was a whistle-top tour of what it is that we have been doing. As I've mentioned, we have a draft action plan which details quite a bit of the actions that which details all the actions that we will be taking forward. And I think that's it from my point of view. Unless there's anything else that, yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for that, Farida. Councillor Nugent-Finn, you have your hand up. After that, Bronwyn wants to speak, and then Councillor Perks. So if you go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Farida, for a very complimentary and very comprehensive presentation. I appreciate it. I know historically how hard this whole tenants engagement strategy is, and yeah, I'm old enough to remember the compact as well. Yeah, so yeah, all familiar ground. But I'm just wondering, you mentioned a budget attached to some of the sort of service level agreements that we're looking at. Is this sort of on comparison with the National Resident Scrutiny Panel? I mean, this is, as we know, it's a formal panel where we can monitor our performance against specific services and expectations, and it covers, a wealth of relevant customer satisfaction and engagement. The purpose is that we create a panel which provides like a critical friend, and it forms good relationships with the staff. And the panel has a very practical function and can actively review specific areas such as task and finish, and provide a platform for interaction. Residents then can visit and review housing services, supporting housing schemes, etc. And I'd like to suggest a simple framework with just, would I like to live here? That's something that I feel is extremely engaging. It's important to attract the diversity from our residents across the Vale of Glamorgan. And some organisations make it a formal application and actually recruit residents with the relevant skills and appropriate representation for our communities. Is that part and parcel of what we're thinking of doing for Farida?
Thank you. A lot of information in there, and I'll try and address each point as I remember it. So certainly, first of all, I will take the budget issue. In terms of the budget, we have historically had a budget to deliver tenant participation, and that budget hasn't been monitored or scrutinised by the tenants as such. So what we will be doing is we will be providing a fully costed budget, so tenants and residents and the internal working group can monitor that from a value for money point of view. Your second point in relation to the National Tenant Participation Network, so that is TPAS, so the National Tenant Participation Advisory Group. As a council, we are members of TPAS. We pay them an annual fee. They provide us with feedback on good practice.
This is slightly different to TPAS. Sorry to interrupt, Farida.
Sorry, this is slightly different to. Okay, I'll address.
It's in conjunction with PAS actually. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll address the issue of TPAS.
It's the NRSP. Okay.
Okay, so I'll address the issue of TPAS first. One of the things that we will be doing is we will be looking to work with TPAS going forward and ensuring that our tenants and residents can access the free training. So we have over the years paid for membership, and one of the questions that we did ask some of our residents, the engaged residents, around how much training have you undertaken over the last 3 years in relation to your role in tenant participation, and the training that they undertook was limited. In terms of tenant engagement and scrutiny, and having a network of residents that can scrutinise the work, working alongside staff members, that's certainly one of the actions that we'll be looking to take forward. And when you see the strategy action plan in the coming weeks, that will crystallise that action for you. And if there's anything else that you want to add to that, more than happy to discuss that and take that on board. Does that answer?
Yeah, thanks very much, Farida, much appreciated. It's as I said, it's in in a roundabout way. This, I was actually referring to the NRSP, which is the National Resident Scrutiny Panel. It's separate to TPAS. Yeah, I value very much what TPAS do as a service, but this is separate again. So maybe we could have another conversation at some point. But it's a very separate service, but it's very well run. So maybe it's something we can look into.
Yeah, so definitely just on the Pacific Tenant Scrutiny Service, we will be launching, as part of the new strategy, we will be launching a scrutiny service, and I can certainly pick that up with you separately.
Wonderful, that's wonderful. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Brooks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I mean, thanks for the presentation. I was really interested. It's not easy to get a tenant engagement strategy off the ground. I think most of us sort of bear the scars over the years from trying to do that. It's not easy, but I think the huge amount of work that you've done there is absolutely fantastic, and it's really great to see. And I'm also delighted to see the fact that leaseholders are now included within that, because leaseholders always seem to be a little bit out of on a limb. They're not sure where they fit in really. So that's really great to see. Obviously I welcome this, but just a quick question about when are you actually hoping that this, obviously it's got to go through all the different phases now and consultations. I'm not sure if I missed it, but when are you actually hoping to implement this if everything goes smoothly with all your consultees?
So we are hoping for this, the draft strategy to go to the next cabinet meeting, and we're hoping to have approval then. Some of the work in terms of the launch of the internal working group has already started. Some of the work around the updating of the website has already started as well. The strategy actually runs from 2021 and it lasts for 3 years. So we are slightly behind, but work has started on it. Mike, I don't know whether you want to come in on this point.
Sorry, I was searching for the National Scrutiny Panel. It wasn't an organisation that I'd come across before. I think it may be an English-based scrutiny organisation, which is probably why we hadn't heard from it. However, in terms of the strategy,
it's been introduced in Wales now, Mike, as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
In terms of the implementation of the strategy, obviously, because as members will be aware, because it's a strategy that affects all council tenants and prospective tenants of the council, there's a requirement to undertake formal statutory consultation. We will obviously follow that process. In terms of implementation, I suppose we're looking probably after Christmas, when you take into account the amount of time in terms of that formal consultation that we will need to undertake for the strategy. Then obviously for Cabinet to approve it as a document initially for consideration and consultation, and then obviously for scrutiny to consider that as well. So I'd imagine implementation will probably be later later on, probably in Q4.
Okay, no, that's great. Thanks both.
Can I pick up, sorry, Chair, could I just pick up the point regarding the federations and national bodies that represent tenants?
Yeah, go ahead.
There are a number of scrutiny organisations across the country that obviously provide services and represent representative groups. My view has always been that it's for the tenants necessarily to indicate which groups that they wish to work with. I have painful scars, as been mentioned earlier, of residents not feeling necessarily supported or engaged with certain representative bodies, and even some tenants preferring to be with one body and others another. So one of those things in terms of where we source expertise and advice from, certainly that where that expertise and advice is being given to tenants, I think it will be for tenants to choose which group that they wish, that, you know, in the same way as we would in terms of looking for training and expertise for you know, from an officer perspective.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, with the sort of development of this strategy, whether we already sort of have expert sort of ideas on how we engage with tenants who are hard to reach, who might not be members of any sort of residency or, you know, sort of tenants association, and how we go about trying to engage them to ensure we get a fuller picture of what tenants feel and what they, you know, sort of want developing within their area and things like that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that I mentioned in my report overview was the fact that we've started talking internally to all staff members around how do we take tenant participation forward, and it's not just about housing management or the tenant participation officer, let's say. It's not their sole responsibility. So, for example, a gas engineer might walk into a property, he is engaging with the tenant. And so therefore, one of the actions that we've got is a presentation will be going to all staff members around what tenant participation is and what it means for everybody in their roles. Because some people are not engaged, some people don't go out, but they have a say. So how do we take their view on board? So in terms of capturing all staff, that's what we'll be looking to do. But equally, one of the things that we have started to do is tenant participation and community development. There is a link there definitely is. And we're doing quite a lot of work in terms of our community development work, in terms of engaging tenants in employability skills, volunteering, and through our projects on volunteering and employability, we are asking our officers to ensure that they're also incorporating tenant engagement activities within their activities. And as part of our new community investment strategy, we will be launching a new model of engagement, and within that engagement model we will be undertaking consultation with our residents. It's going to be a core part of what we do, so we'll be incorporating feedback at a number of levels in a number of different ways through a number of different services. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. So, yeah, and that's you know, obviously that's really welcome as well. You know, sort of, as you said, sort of any sort of Vale staff that meets a tenant has the opportunity to actually, you know, at some level discuss what their thoughts and feelings are on the tenancy that they hold, the place where they live, so that we can get that feedback, so we know, you know, sort of which way we want to go with different things. So no, that's lovely. Thank you very much for your presentation and for your answer.
Thank you.
Mike, if you want to come back in, yes?
Just to follow on from that point, I don't think we've got a fixed view in terms of how we engage. You know, I spent a lovely Friday afternoon at our new Penarth food pod a fortnight ago, and people engage because they want to engage. I think if we had told them we were there to do tenant engagement and we wanted their views, I'm not sure we would have got much in the way of feedback. And that's the same for Festival. And I know, we've talked about that. Festival is such an important tool for us in terms of having an informal relationship that allows tenants to open up. And it is about that. What we want to get away from, I suppose, is relying just on one method of engagement, which, to a certain extent we've done for a number of years. Digital will allow us a further area, particularly for those that are geographically perhaps excluded. Not everyone comes to Festival if they're having to travel necessarily from Cowbridge or Llantwit or wherever. But then when we run the projects like the gardening project at Crochet Court, where we're engaging with school children, the local community, the older residents at Crochet Court, we're able to get a lot more feedback in that way. So yeah, it's just really to amplify some of those examples that we're already doing. But the point that Frida makes, every contact with the council, every contact with housing is an opportunity, and therefore we do see it that way. Although what I wouldn't want to see is every time somebody goes, we engage with somebody, like, well, will you fill in a questionnaire now for us? Because, I'm bombarded with questionnaires and having the time to fill them in. There are different ways of doing that, and I think a more informal ways tend to give us the best feedback.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Nugent, I believe you wish to come back in.
Very briefly, thank you, Chair. It's just to reiterate what's been said, but add a little bit more on. Couldn't agree with you more, Mike. I was out with the Safer Vale team, and very informally, we were engaging with tenants. So that's another, Farida, perhaps there's a team we'd like to work with, but it was just great. And timing's really, really important. I said, look, can we go after school? So there was children out playing. It doesn't matter location. It was just, I know there's going to be children there. So it just very informally engaged beautifully with tenants. So just another bit of food for thought. Perhaps we could work with Safer Vale. It was a very productive afternoon, and lots of tenant related and certainly ownership ideas and suggestions come out of that. So something that perhaps we could champion going forward. Thank you, Chair.
No problem. Unless anyone else has anything to say, are we happy to go with the recommendations on this?
Yes, happy to go.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I think I missed Farida. I think she wants to come back in then. I'm sorry. Or was it a legacy?
It's okay.
Sorry. Okay, so if we're all happy with this, we'll go on to item number 6, which is the annual delivery plan monitoring report, Q1. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I won't go through the background and the detail of the report. I know the director has done that on a number of occasions in terms of aligning our performance monitoring reports to our corporate plan and our 4 wellbeing objectives. If I can just take you through the main highlights of our Q1 report first of all. The report indicates we've made significant positive progress in Q1 in relation to our annual delivery plan, which has contributed to an overall green status for the plan at Q1. All of our 4 corporate wellbeing objectives were attributed a green status, and positive given, as people will be aware, the ongoing challenges arising from the pandemic. 97%, so 306 out of 315 planned activities have been attributed to green performance, reflecting that positive progress, with only 1% at amber and 2% attributed a red status. Of those, that 2%, 7 actions attributed a red performance status during the quarter. 29% were directly a result of service prioritisation measures in relation to coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic recovery, coronavirus recovery. The report also has an update in terms of recovery from coronavirus, and that's included as one of the appendices in the report. Of our quarterly performance measures, the 42 which are aligned to our wellbeing objectives, 34 of our measures where a performance status were applicable, 50% of those were green, 17% amber, 33% red status. In relation to the 11 measures attributed the red performance status during the quarter, the impact of COVID-19 had contributed to 54%, or 6 of those missing their target. Specifically in relation to this committee and our planned activities, I'm pleased to say that 97% of our activities were attributed a green performance status, and only 3%, or 1 action, a red status. Of our 7 quarterly measures reported, 29%, or 2 were given a green, 43, or 3 were given amber, 29%, or 2 were given red status. And in relation to the 2 measures given a red status, COVID-19 has contributed to missing the target for 1 of those. So in terms of the report itself, as I mentioned, at Appendix A is the full report highlighting all of the actions and performance measures. Appendix B relates to the report in relation to the Homes and Safe Committee, and in Appendix 3 indicates those actions with a red status and remedial actions. The report itself is asking for you to consider the performance results and progress towards achieving our commitments for the annual delivery plan 2021-22, that you consider the remedial actions and areas under performance and the challenges identified, and views and recommendations to be referred back to Cabinet for consideration and approval, and finally that our recovery strategy and Directorate recovery plans in response to the coronavirus pandemic are noted. If I take you to Appendix C first of all then, and you will see on Appendix C there is the 1 action and the 2 performance measures highlighted. If I take you through those, the first action, implement the older person's accommodation with care ready and support strategy. We indicate there that has been 10% completed. Part of the delay there is effectively we've set up a working group to design a specification. We've done that. That specification now we will be tendering in the next few weeks. So I would imagine by the end of Q2, we will have caught up on that activity. In terms of the 2 measures that are highlighted, the percentage of domestic abuse victims that report they're feeling safer as a result of target hardening. Now, given our performance, when you look back to Q1 last year, where we achieved 100%, it obviously is disappointing. I think it's fair to say. The 78% reflects on we've undertaken 25 target hardening areas of work, and the unsatisfactory responses we received from 3 of those. 2 of them related to the work that was undertaken. One of the issues one of the residents indicated is that they thought there was inadequate lighting, or the lighting wasn't powerful enough. and in respect of that, we will be going back with our electrical contractor to resolve those issues. And the final one of the three, whilst we have target hardened the property, the tenant still felt unsafe as a result of the abuser knowing where that person lived and was looking to move home. So whilst the target hardening there as a measure was there to provide some reassurance in terms of the tenant themselves, it wasn't necessarily providing all of the assurance that she wanted, and obviously whilst that tenant is obviously being considered for a move to alternative accommodation given the circumstances, we will continue to provide her with support and guidance during that time. So those were the three exception areas. So one action and two performance. But sorry, I've forgotten the last one. The last of the measures is in relation to the number of new or accessible adapted homes delivered. We've set a target of 10 homes, accessible homes to be delivered. We've delivered 5 in the first quarter against that target of 10, and those were the homes that we provided at Home View. But clearly, given our programme, our development programme will be coming on stream at different places during the year, we would anticipate by the end of the year we will achieve the target of 40 properties across the year, new accessible homes across both the council and our RSL development programmes. So I've got nothing necessarily further to add. As you can see, myself and Dave and Fareed are on the call. If there are questions in relation to the report that cover those areas, we'll do our best to answer them. However, if there are areas of the Homes and Safe Scrutiny Committee's wellbeing objective and officers are not here today, then obviously, as we've done in the past, we'll take those questions to the officers and feedback independently to members of Scrutiny. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike, I should say. Sandra, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Mike for giving some background to the one for the target hardening. I was going to ask a question around there, but you've actually answered that question already. So thank you for giving details on that. But I did want to sort of commend the housing department for the completion of the 11 homes that I think was in this last quarter as well. And I had the opportunity to go and visit those homes in Court Ward for, you know, people who are homeless, and it's actually fantastic, the modern methods of construction and stuff. And I suppose I am going to ask, are we going to be using that again with future sort of developments and stuff like that? Will we be using similar to the same companies, or we're looking at using different companies? I actually really like those houses there. I wouldn't mind living there myself, to be honest. Thank you, Mike.
Would you like me to respond, Chair? Yes, Councillor Perks. We and the residents are extremely happy with the homes that we've been able to deliver at Court Road. Certainly in terms of discussions we've had internally and with the executive and the leader and deputy leader and cabinet member, we have been tasked to find more sites quickly. We are looking at a number of our own garage sites, our larger garage sites, which some of which may be vacant at the moment, where we may have demolished garages in the past. We're looking at alternative land sites. We had a conversation at Strategic Housing Board last week, and a number of sites, potential sites, were put forward that perhaps we could consider. In terms of whether they would be the same company, we obviously have to go out to tender, as we did at Court Road, and as a result of which I can't guarantee that, but in terms of them being properties built through modern methods of construction, yes, they would be. There are a number of different products there, from, as we know, from container type accommodation right through to other forms of more what appear to be more traditional forms of accommodation. So yes, but I think given the tremendous amount of work that the council has done and officers have done in providing accommodation for, as we know, over 100 people currently still in temporary accommodation in the form of hotels and bed and breakfasts. The priority afforded to actually providing new homes is immense. And we will be, as I say, not only through our own developments, but in work in tandem with our RSL partners, looking to ensure that those tenants, or those residents, sorry, are provided with stable, secure accommodation then going forward. I think it's been mentioned earlier, hasn't it? Over 6,000 people on the council's housing waiting list at the moment. A large number of those people will have been on the waiting list a considerable amount of time. And as I say, we are ramping up our development programme, our new build programme at pace and scale. We've taken a number of new sites through planning committee recently. We've got a number of developers on site already in Barry. We're about to go on site in Penarth shortly. So really exciting times in terms of our development programme, but I'm mindful that we've got a very short window between now and whenever the Welsh Government funding expires to actually provide alternative accommodation for, as I say, over 100 people currently in bed and breakfast and our hotels. But I welcome, everyone's feedback on the accommodation. I think, as I say, our residents' feedback was really welcome as well.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to ask? Yeah, happy to.
Sorry, Chair, you froze.
Yeah, I just realised that. I suddenly looked at my screen and nobody was moving, nobody was blinking. Sorry. As I was saying, is if nobody else would like to speak, then we have 3 recommendations. Are we happy to accept, move and note those recommendations?
Happy to move and note.
Yeah.
Second.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah.
Yes, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, you froze again.
Mr. Chairman, as the sites are open.
You're moving again now, Chair, you're fine.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with this now. Okay, so agenda item 7 is any items which the chairman has declared urgent under part 1. I have none. I have no issues, no items under part 2 either. So all that's left for me to do is to remind you that the next meeting is on the 13th of October at 6 p.m. And just to say, have a good evening. Thank you all for coming here tonight. And thank you for everybody who's contributed.
Good.
I will see you in the next meeting.
Night.
Good night,
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.